Now today we have a wonderful opportunity to look at birds in a new way. And our guide is Dr. Richard Prum. He's an ornithologist. Can you say that? Ornithologist? Ornithologist, that is a person who studies birds. Now, Dr. Prum is a professor of ornithology, ecology, and evolutionary biology here at Yale, and his specialty is looking at the study of feather growth and their coloration. And today he's going to share his thoughts on the evolution of birds, particularly why birds are dinosaurs. So perhaps you'll welcome Professor Prum with me to the podium.
Okay. Well, thank you for coming this morning. Can everybody hear me? Yeah, great. I'm going to introduce or start today by introducing myself. I am basically a bird watcher. I started as a bird watcher at about the age of 10. And it was about 6 months after I got my first pair of glasses. And I think I was sort of a regular scientific kid looking around the world for something to attach my curiosity to, something that would be fascinating. And I got a pair of glasses, and suddenly the world came into focus, and the objects of my future obsessions appeared in the environment, in focus. And I think since that time, I have just continued wandered down this same path as essentially a scientific bird watcher. What's been most fascinating to me is the diversity of birds, all the different kinds. And luckily for me, that's been an excuse to travel anywhere in the world, where just about anywhere you're going to find some fascinating birds. So it's been a marvelous career in science. About 20 years after I started bird watching, though, when I was already a professional and a professor, I came to realize something that was amazing. It wasn't amazing in a little way, like the little discoveries we make during a scientific research or career, but it was amazing in a big way. And what was amazing was to realize, finally, through the strength of the evidence and the rigor of the analysis, that living birds are actually extant dinosaurs. And that just about every aspect of the biology of birds that we're interested in can be changed or informed by our understanding of this new and exciting fact. Come on in, guys. There's plenty of chairs, and chairs even down front. So what I want to do today is share that excitement and tell you a little bit about the biology of dinosaurs, the biology of birds, and why we know that birds are dinosaurs. So the talk today, a better, more cheeky title, and one that I thought that I should send, but I didn't, is why should we care about the dinosaur origin of birds? And I guess I was afraid that too many people would answer, well, I don't, and not show up. So I didn't use this title. But it's really it is the real title of what I'm going to talk about today. Why should we care? And I hope that by the end of today, I'll convince you that there's a lot of amazing things, both about our understanding of birds themselves and our trying to imagine and understand the biology of dinosaurs that would change by the fact that birds have originated as a lineage of dinosaurs. So in today's talk, what we'll do is cover three things. First, evidence that birds are theropod dinosaurs, that they are evolved from a particular group of dinosaurs, the theropods, the bipedal meat-eating dinosaurs. And then how the theropod origin of birds changes our view of bird biology. And then lastly, how the theropod origin of birds changes our view of dinosaur biology. And that'll be our trip. So we're going to dive right in. And now with the size of today's group, I'm going to ask that we wait for questions toward the end. And I will promise or commit to be here as long as the last questioner wants to, or until we get kicked out of the room by someone. Okay, so how do we know that birds are theropod dinosaurs? Well, this is an example in science of a historical question. Right? And I'm going to introduce you right off the bat to the fact that we are trying to reconstruct a little bit about the history of the tree of life. If you imagine the ancestry of all the organisms on the planet, they are interrelated to one another through history, and the history forms a tree. And this tree of life is one of the primary goals of the historical science of biology. The kind of questions we ask in historical science are a little different than you may be familiar with in other aspects of of biology classes or other science classes. Actually, we're going to be interested in questions that are more related maybe to cosmology, the history of the universe, than some other questions, right? Or say linguistics. We're trying to reconstruct what was happening in the past. Now, in order to do this, we're going to be using the field of systematics and evolutionary biology, and this is the expertise of people here at Yale that you'll find in the Peabody Museum or the Department of Ecology and Evolutionary Biology. Well, how do we reconstruct the tree of life? Well, the way we do it is looking for particular kinds of characters. And these characters are what we call shared derived characters. And they help us identify branches in the tree of life. Well, what is a shared derived character? Well, shared we all understand. Those are characters that more than one organism has. And derived means novel or new. They're evolutionarily new. So traits that are evolutionarily new and shared are the ones that are going to help us examine a branch. And as a thought experiment, so let's imagine whether we're looking at a lungfish. I don't even need a picture of it. You can all imagine, right? It's a big sort of lumpy-looking fish, and it actually has lungs. And you ask the question, well, is it closer to fish, like a salmon or a trout? Or is it closer to a cow, right? Or perhaps a human being? Well, there's lots of characters that the lungfish shares with other fish. Scaliness and swimming in the water, etc. But there's one special character, a shared derived character, that shares with other tetrapods, including us, and that's the presence of lungs. So the presence of a shared derived characters help us identify the branches in the tree of life, and one of those branches would be a branch that includes the ancestors or the descendants of those organisms that evolved lungs, in particular things like the lungfish and ourselves. So we're going to be examining shared derived characters to reconstruct the history of life. And in order to do this, what we need to do is examine extant birds, their characters, fossil birds, other fossil dinosaurs, other reptiles for shared derived features. So in the first part of the talk, I'm going to be introducing you to some of that evidence. This is Archaeopteryx lithographica, the famous fossil bird. This is the earliest fossil organism that everyone universally agrees is most closely related to birds. It's has feathers and all these other features, and it was certainly discovered excitingly 2 years after the publication of The Origin of Species, and led to some new appreciation for the evolutionary theory and the origin of birds. However, the origin of birds, and particularly the relationships of Archaeopteryx, were controversial from the beginning. If we look, it actually has a mosaic of characters, including a bunch of avian similarities with birds, including feathers, wings that were shaped as forelimbs, a furcula. The furcula is the fused clavicles. That's the wishbone that everybody knows from the barbaric Thanksgiving ritual that extends luck to those who get the big side, right? The furcula, which is a little bone in the chest. The pubis, which is a bone in the synsacrum or in the pelvis that points backward. Partially fused foot bones, and the first toe or hallux pointing backwards. These are all features that tell us that Archaeopteryx is closely related to birds. Now, there were other ones that were more reptilian similarities. Presence of teeth, a long bony tail, unjointed ribs, gastralia or belly ribs, you can see right here. No sternum in some cases. No carpometacarpus. This is a complex bone that everyone will recognize the next time they have buffalo wings from the hand. And then claws on the fingers, which were also reptilian. So what scientists needed to do ultimately was to look among these and try to figure out which of these are derived and which of these are primitive or not derived similarities in order to reconstruct the tree. Well, there's been a lot of controversy, and I'm going to skip over the history. We could talk about it. It's been very colorful and fascinating. But what I'm going to skip right to is to the punchline. What is the history, or what is the tree of life, this particular branch in the tree of life, look like now, based on the evidence we have now? Well, the critical break in this century-long story came with the discovery of Deinonychus. And this was described in the 60s and 70s by John Ostrom, who was a curator at the Yale Peabody Museum and a professor in geology and geophysics. And he described Deinonychus, this raptor dinosaur, from a specimen that was from the American West that was about 80 million years old. And over the ensuing years, in combination with Jacques Gaudier, who's now also a professor here at Yale and in the Peabody Museum, a new hypothesis was established based on the identification of shared derived similarities from the tip of the nose all the way to the tip of the tail, every part of the body, to support the idea that these raptor dinosaurs in particular were very closely related to birds. Now, this is Bambiraptor, the most recent raptor, or one of the most recent raptor dinosaurs described from the American West. What we're going to do is march through the body and review some of these characters. To give you a background, we'll start with what the tree of life looks like. So here's an example of a tree. So imagine these branches are lineages in the tree of life, and these ancient events give rise to new groups. This we're starting with at the further back in the tree. This is tetrapods. This is the phylogeny of all the creatures that have 4 limbs. So here's our tetrapod ancestor. And the first branch to branch off are amphibians like frogs and salamanders. Next come the mammals, which include us. And then this branch we call reptiles includes turtles, lizards and snakes and other odd things like tuatara. And then this group here is where we're going to be for the rest of today. These are the archosaurs. And the archosaurs are a branch of reptiles that includes crocodilians, pterosaurs, and the branch that gave rise to birds and dinosaurs. This is our little neighborhood, and we won't go through the characters that support this, but we'll go right into the birds and dinosaurs here. Now, the tree of life is complicated, and all of you probably know more, some of you probably know more dinosaurs than I do. But the tree of life of dinosaurs looks something like this. Well, way back in the past, we had a single lineage, and through a series of speciation events, we ended up with this large radiation of dinosaurs through time. Well, let's look at the main branches. The first branch we have are the Ornithischian dinosaurs over here, and the Saurischian dinosaurs over here. Let's look at the Ornithischians. Well, we've got ceratopsians, iguanodontids, hadrosaurs. What are those names? And I think most of you know the Ornithischian dinosaurs pretty well. They're a bunch of mostly vegetarian and mostly walking on 4 legs dinosaurs, some with ornamentation like horns. And I'm sure all of you are excited about the Torosaurus sculpture, one of the ceratopsians going up. This little, they weren't all large. Here's the, I think, Microceratops, which is about the size of a modern rabbit, and some were highly armored. So those are the Ornithischians, vegetarians. Now, in the Saurischian dinosaurs, this is a large group that includes all of the theropods and the birds. Here's birds right up at the top. This branch, one little branch within this larger radiation. Well, this first branch here, back here, give rise to the sauropods. What were they? They're the closest to this theropod group we're going to be talking about. The sauropods, of course, were the gigantic vegetarian dinosaurs, including Brontosaurus, Brachiosaurus, Seismosaurus, these huge things. The next group, of course, is this theropods, and these are the meat-eating bipedal dinosaurs, this branch right here that includes birds. We're going to be spending a few minutes looking at those groups and trying to find out why birds belong within them. Here's our well-known theropods, things like Allosaurus or our friend Tyrannosaurus rex, Oviraptor, this beakless guy or toothless guy with a beak, and Velociraptor. This is the thing that chased their kids around the kitchen in Jurassic Park, right? And what we'll find is that Velociraptor should have looked a whole lot different than it did in the Jurassic Park movie. Well, in my ornithology class to Yale undergrads, what we do is we march through this tree and learn all these characters. But in each case here, what I've shown is a particular little branch I've labeled with a bunch of shared derived characters. These are the anatomical or features that allow us to identify who is who and what branch the birds belong to. What I'm going to do is give you a quick pass through this tree and show you some of the features that support it. One of the things that's fascinating is to understand, or many of the characters that are most understandable are those that contribute to how creatures function. And so what I want to talk a little bit is about how crocodiles walk. So if you can imagine a crocodile walking like this. He's walking along, and his body is swiveling in the middle, and he's using his tail as he walks. Well, why is he using his tail as he walks? Well, in order to make the femur, or this bone in the leg, pull backwards, he has a large set of muscles. And these muscles actually attach on the tail. So one of the functions of the tail in a crocodile is to help pull that leg backwards as as he walks. And he has a huge muscle, this caudofemoralis longus, that does that. And that muscle attaches to a bump on the femur, this leg bone, that allows that muscle to pull really hard on that leg. And that allows crocodiles to walk. Now, this is informative because crocodiles are the living reptiles that are closest to birds. Well, let's see what the situation is in birds. Well, in birds, this caudofemoralis muscle is really kind of tiny. It's a little strap shape, and it doesn't really contribute much to how birds walk. It's actually a little bit like the appendix. It's kind of a vestigial muscle. Now, if we look throughout dinosaur and theropod phylogeny, what we find is as we go from crocodiles through ornithischians, sauropods, and then to the theropods, what we see is a reduction in the size of the tail and the size of the flanges that this muscle inserts on. So it's getting smaller and smaller through evolutionary time after bipedality evolved and actually the tail got smaller. And if we look at the bump on the femur that the muscle inserts on, we find that it gets smaller and smaller and smaller. It's very small or non-existent in Deinonychus and almost non-existent in living birds. So that's an example of an evolutionary trend of derived features that support the placement of birds in dinosaurs. Moving up the body, if we look at the pelvis, we see all sorts of features that are associated with the origin of birds. In particular, one of the pubis, this bone within the pelvis that points backwards, this feature is found earlier on in raptor dinosaurs, and then in others, including Tyrannosaurus, and within all these theropods. So we can see this trend to the evolution of a bipedal synsacrum or pelvis in the evolution of these birds. So here's Deinonychus and other raptors. Now, moving up the body from if we look at the hind limb, we see all sorts of features. One is the hind toe pointing backwards, almost in a perched position. Of course, the raptor dinosaurs had the killer claw, the killer second claw. And even if we look closely at Archaeopteryx fossil, you'll find, wait a minute, that first toe is a little bigger than we'd expect. There's some elements of that enlarged first toe that we find in Archaeopteryx. We also see the way the leg bones are attached, the way the axial skeleton moves, even within the chest cavity. One of the things that's interesting, some of you may know that birds have air sacs, that a lot of there have outpocketings of the lungs that invade many of the bones of the skeleton and the head. They're not used for breathing, but they do hold air. And the interesting thing is that if we go back into theropod dinosaurs, we find that a lot of their bones are hollow in the same way that bird bones are. That this evolved long before bird flight, but it's another feature that unites them. If we look in more detail at the hand or at the chest cavity, we'll see that, for example, here's the furcula or the wishbone of Bambiraptor. It turns out that the wishbone is not a unique feature in birds, but evolved earlier on in the theropod dinosaurs. And if anyone's had the opportunity to see Sue in Chicago at the Field Museum, one of the great, best discoveries that was found with Sue, this new Tyrannosaurus rex that's on exhibit there, is that it turns out it has a furcula. It has a wishbone. So Tyrannosaurus rex even had a wishbone. That would have been a heck of a Thanksgiving ritual. I think there would have been a lot of arguments over who won. I don't think they would have been able to pull it apart. So the furcula, this bone actually looks almost identical to the furcula of Archaeopteryx. Within the wing bones, this is the humerus, or the arm bones within the humerus of the forelimb. There's a curvature in some of them that are shared only by birds, etc. So when we look at the bodies, the characters of Bambiraptor or theropod dinosaurs and Archaeopteryx, what we see is a whole host of features going throughout the body that unite them, shared derived features that indicate that birds, the appropriate position for birds within the tree of life is within the theropod dinosaurs. This informs a lot of interesting things. For example, my colleague Jacques Gaudier has been able to show pretty convincingly that the prey capture stroke within raptor dinosaurs, that ability to run out and seize, say, small children in the kitchen or whatever prey item with your forelimbs and bring them in a sort of praying mantis-like stroke, preceded the evolution of the flight stroke in birds, which is an amazingly similar item. And so this is an example of features that come out of it. Oh, another one that's great is the fingers. Birds have 3 digits within the hand. And if we look at a phylogeny going from crocodiles, ornithischian dinosaurs, sauropods, up to the theropod dinosaurs, what we see is a reduction of the outer digits. These are the hand right here. What we see is that The pinky and the ring finger become gradually reduced until finally they're lost within Allosaurus and then Deinonychus and Archaeopteryx. And this is some of the most amazing characters. Here we have the feathers or the hands of a modern bird, an Archaeopteryx and Deinonychus. And one of the fascinating things, this is one of the things that really sold me, was that you have within the third finger a long bone, then two short bones, and then a long bone. And that's in Deinonychus, and here's an Archaeopteryx, a long bone, two short bones, and a long bone. Why does that happen? That's so when the hand closes, that third finger actually closes in on the hand. Instead of folding straight down, it folds in at an angle to close in around a piece of food or a prey item. Well, some of the most exciting evidence, though, came not from the bones, which are the classic materials of paleontology, but from a new realm, and that was the presence of feathers. Starting in about 1998 with some exciting finds from Liaoning province in China, there were basically a new treasure trove of fossils discovering for the first time filamentous or fuzzy materials on the skin of theropod dinosaurs. These fossils were about 125 million years old, and they included a diversity of creatures. Well, one of the problems with them is that, some of the first Chinese researchers that described them said, these are primitive feathers. These are the first feathers, and that feathers originated in dinosaurs before the origin of flight and before the origin of birds. This is a very threatening hypothesis. And the reason is that for about 100 years, the favorite idea for how feathers came to be was that they evolved as elongate scales for the purpose of flight. And that basically feathers evolved for flight from things that looked a lot like shingles on a house. Just imagine a scale getting longer and longer and longer. So when people looked at this fuzzy stuff, they said, that can't be feathers. That can't be simple feathers or primitive feathers, because feathers evolved for flight, and that wouldn't work for flight at all, right? So at this point in the literature, about 5 years ago, there was a problem in determining, well, what did primitive feathers look like? The problem was that Archaeopteryx, of course, has completely modern feathers. So to understand the origin of feathers, we had to imagine backwards into the evolutionary past to try to reconstruct what they look like. And this is some of the subject of my own research. To give you a little background, I'll show you how we tried to solve this problem. Here's a feather. Feathers are complicated branch structures. They're the most complicated things that grow out of the skin of just about any animal. And they have a main shaft or rachis, and then coming off the shaft are a series of smaller branches called barbs. And if we look at those barbs, here's an example of a barb coming off of the main shaft of the feather. There are even smaller branches coming off of those barbs. These are called barbules. The feather flies or allows flight because there are tiny little hooks on the tips of the barbules that hook into the grooves of the barbules of the neighboring barb. And all of these, like Velcro, they zipper the feather together. And this is both an engineering feat and an evolutionary feat. How did these complicated branch structures evolve? Well, just to give you more background, there's all sorts of different kinds of feathers, like the down that's in your pillow, or feathers on the body of birds. They vary in the shape of these little barbules and determine whether it's fuzzy or in a plane. Here's an example of a fuzzy down feather. Well, how do these things all grow? Well, one of the things that I hope you all remember is that the key to this mystery comes from the fact that feathers are totally tubular. And this is shameless co-option of surfer slang to mean really cool. But it also, like the ultimate wave that you might surf on. But also, the tubularity of feathers is one of the key features that allows us to understand how feather diversity happened. And this is an example of an embryonic chick. And it shows that the feathers, before they come out all fluffy, they actually are completely tubular. If we cut a growing feather in half like this, here's from a growing contour feather from a macaw, you'll see that it's arranged in a tube. There's dermal pulp in the middle, and that the feather is actually this tubular material that's hollow, and that these are the barb ridges. These are the things that are going to become the branches of the feather. If we look at it in cross-section, we see it's rolled up in a tube, and all those specialized branches are these features on the side, all rolled up. Well, how does that turn into a branched feather? Well, feathers are pretty amazing in that they're branched like a tree, but they grow from their base like a hair. And what that means is, if we think about how a tree branches, it branches by bifurcation or branching at each of its tips. But in a feather, the tip of the feather is the oldest. Well, the answer to that is a unique form of growth that we call helical growth. And here's a cartoon version of it. And when I first started lecturing on this, I would get lots of chalk, and I'd get all confused looks out of the audience. It would take me weeks. But then we designed this computer animation. So what we're about to see is a quick computer animation of the process of branched feather growth to get the idea of how a branched feather grows from within the embryo. So it starts as a small tube. This is sort of a little outgrowth of the skin. It's hollow in the center. And that tube becomes subdivided into a series of compartments. Each of these compartments are going to be the barbs of the feather. And they grow by recruitment of stem cell progeny out of the bottom. At the bottom of this tube is a series of stem cells that grow all the cells that become the feather. Now it's being pushed out of the follicle or this tube. On the ventral side, we have new barb ridges growing. And you can see they're not growing straight down. They're actually growing with a bias toward the dorsal side. They're growing around as they get longer. As they go toward the dorsal side, what happens is they crash into one another and fuse. All right? And so then when they fuse, they're actually forming the shaft or the rachis of the feather. Then when the growth is done, the sheath falls off and they opens up. And as it opens up, it forms the planar feather that we know. So this shows that the inside of the feather, the bottom surface of the feather comes from the inside of the tube, and the top surface of the feather comes from the outside of the tube. And that's one of the things that showed that the feathers couldn't evolve as elongate scales because the top and bottom surfaces are not the same ones. So what I ended up doing was creating a theory for the evolution of feathers based on how they grew. And I started, and this is the whole ball of wax right here. We're going to go take it quickly and simply through a series of stages. And what I imagined is, this is a little cartoon. Imagine that little tube, that circle at the bottom of the tube as it grows. This is a cartoon version of how it grew. And I imagined that the simplest feather was the simplest possible tube, this undifferentiated collar. And that the next stage was the compartmentalization of that into something that would grow different barb ridges. And then helical growth of the barb ridges, or the evolution of barbules, those little, the secondary little branches, both of them together, and then differentiated barbules. What did that look like in terms of the feathers? Well, each one of these follicles will actually make a specific kind of feather. Well, what did the simplest feather look like? Well, we predicted that the simplest feather would be a tube, a simple tube, right? And that the second stage of feathers would be a tuft, and then finally either a planar feather or a complicated tuft, and then finally a doubly branched feather, but notice there's no hooks for them to hook onto the neighbor. Only at that point could you get hooks to develop or evolve. There's little distal hooks on the barbules that hook onto the neighbors. So this is the first feather that would form a coherent vein or a tight vein. And then finally an asymmetrical feather, like this one that evolves in flight, and other graduate level subjects in feather diversity. So here's a scenario for how feathers went from simple to complicated. And one of the interesting things about this theory is that it shows that this is the first feather that could have functioned in flight. So the punchline here is that saying that feathers evolved for flight is like saying that fingers evolved to play the piano, right? Which is, of course, a silly idea. And why is that? Well, because only the most derived and specialized possible fingers or digits could function in such a specialized way to produce the kind of movements that are required to play a piano. In the same way, only the most complicated and derived feathers could have had a coherent tight vein that would have functioned in flight. Well, how were we able to test this model? Well, luckily, there was a whole explosion of fossils coming out of China, literally many, many new fossils each year with amazing new features. Here was this one Sinosauropteryx with the simplest form of dino fuzz, single filaments, probably hollow. Then came Caudipteryx, which was on display at the Yale Peabody back in 1999. And here's an organism called Sinornithosaurus. This is a raptor dinosaur. At this point, in about the year 2000, there were already still lots of skeptics on this, and we were able to examine this piece of sort of Cretaceous roadkill, if you will. This is a raptor dinosaur about the size of a fox, but you can see that it's covered with this fuzzy stuff all around its skin. And by examining this in great detail, we were able to find out that it had feathers that were very much like stage 2 and stage 3 of the model. But the final piece of evidence came from this guy. This is on a dromaeosaur, an unnamed dromaeosaur from China, and these are impressions. There's the rachis, the main shaft, and here are the barbs coming off. So this was absolutely perfect evidence of modern feathers on a dinosaur that had the killer claw on its foot, just like Deinonychus, and much closer in age to the origin of birds. So these were now great evidence that feathers evolved in theropod dinosaurs before the origin of birds and before the origin of flight. So if we look at this example of the tree of theropods, here are birds up here, and there's Archaeopteryx. The closest branch to Archaeopteryx includes the raptor dinosaurs and Troodontids, then others, Caudipteryx and Oviraptor, Tyrannosaurus, this diverse group here, and then ultimately Allosaurus, or the other large meat eaters. So let's look at the distribution of these feathers on the tree. The simplest feather was found in Sinosauropteryx. Then the tufted feathers found in Bepiosaurus, this Therizinosaur. Complete modern feathers with a vein and everything in Caudipteryx, also in all the raptor dinosaurs. And then within the birds, of course, asymmetrical feathers, the kind of feathers that would allow birds to fly, asymmetrical in shape like the wing on an airplane. And so if we examine the pattern of these shared derived features, what we can see is that the origin of feathers occurred very likely in this branch of theropod dinosaurs, and very likely with the very simplest tubular feather. Then we can see that all of these share another level of complexity, reflected by stage 2. That stage 2, some kind of tufted feather evolved back here. Then we don't have sufficient fossils to nail down exactly all these other stages, but a complicated feather evolving somewhere in these lineages, certainly by here. And then lastly, the asymmetrical feather, the flight feather, in the birds. Well, this was an amazing amount of progress. And under 5 years, we had gone from knowing almost nothing about the origin of feathers to having a detailed hypothesis about how feather complexity evolved. And it showed that feathers were no longer unique to birds, that the thing that had been thought since the time of Aristotle and the ancient Greeks to be something absolutely unique to birds was actually not unique to birds, but found in theropod dinosaurs before the origin of the group that we call birds. We were able to confirm this with some molecular studies of how feathers grow, and I'm not going to spend much time on it except to say that there's possible to unite paleontological studies with modern molecular biology and look at some of the aspects. So we were able to look at the development of feathers using studies of the expression of the gene Sonic Hedgehog. Yes, that was named after the character in the Nintendo game. And bone morphogenetic protein, which, as far as I know, is not the name of a character in any computer game. But by studying these genes, we're able to also confirm some of the aspects of the model. Well, this is fascinating because after literally thousands of years of thinking that feathers were unique to birds, we found out that feathers are not unique to birds. They evolved in theropod dinosaurs. And it's one of the first things that came as a real shock to ornithologists. I think we have our own special word, ornithology, a name to call ourselves, and we like to think that many of the things that are attributes of birds are really special. And by finding out that they evolved earlier on, we find that maybe they're less special than we thought. And this has overturned a lot what we thought. Well, there's been even more exciting discoveries. What came after this was Microraptor. Microraptor gui is a small dinosaur. If this fossil would be about this big, the body is a little bit bigger than a pigeon with this long tail, about 24 inches long. But what's fascinating about it is that it has asymmetrical feathers on its wings, on its forelimbs, and on its hind limbs. And if you see right here, you can see that it also has, even for a raptor of this size, a killer claw on its second toe, this long tail, and then a paddle-shaped, sort of teardrop-shaped paddle of feathers at the end of the tail. This was a revolution because it appears to be a four-winged dinosaur. And it's actually in this and many other internal characters place it in the raptor dinosaurs, not with the birds. So it overturned a lot of what we thought we knew about feathers and the evolution of flight. Here's our previous hypothesis with asymmetrical feathers originating in the ancestor of birds and absent in Microraptor and the dromaeosaurs. But this indicated that actually asymmetrical feathers originated before the origin of the group we call birds, right? So now even flight, even aerodynamic behavior, the thing that we really thought was unique to birds, may not be unique to the group that people have traditionally called birds. So suddenly, flight and feathers, the things that in generations of ornithology classes people have said, this is what makes a bird, are now no longer restricted to birds. What does that mean? Well, it means that, at least in some intellectual level, we have a crisis. What do we call birds? You know, how do we distinguish birds from dinosaurs? And the interesting thing is that this problem is a result of advance and new discovery. It's a result of our knowledge, and our previous certainty that feathers and flight were restricted to birds was a result of our ignorance of the tree of life and the pattern of character evolution. Now, I want to point to, there's one more fascinating wrinkle about Microraptor. These guys think that it's possible that the 2 wings of birds in this group may have evolved from 4 wings originally within Microraptor, and that that gliding on 4 wings may be primitive to the dromaeosaurs and troodontids, and that this 4 wings may have evolved to 2. This may be similar to the way we see in insects, where primitively insects like dragonflies or butterflies have 4 wings, but lots of specialized groups of insects have only 2, like flies. So that's an exciting new frontier in the research. What about this one? I want to point to another thing, and this is our old favorite pal, Tyrannosaurus. The first thing I want to say is that the tree of life now tells us, or supported tree of life, that Tyrannosaurus is unrelated to the other large meat eaters. It's an independent origin of huge, ferocious, carnivorous theropod, right? Which is kind of neat. It was a great idea invented multiple times, like a serial movie just kept coming. Vicious predator number 2. But as you can see here, it's sitting right within the picture, the part of the tree of life that would tell us that, man, T-Rex had feathers, right? And when I can remember, I came to visit when I was not yet here at Yale. I came to visit at a meeting for John Ostrom here at Yale in 1999, where all the Caudipteryx and Sinosauropteryx, all these guys and we were just putting together this story and how it might happen. And I was electrified. I went back and I put my kids, I lined them up literally on the couch, and I said, listen, guys, I want you to remember this. I'm going to tell you, Tyrannosaurus Rex had feathers. And I want you to remember that I told you, right? Because you're the first kids on the block that know this, right? And they're like, oh, no. That T-Rex didn't have feathers. There's no way, But one of the things we predict from this phylogeny, from this tree, is that T-Rex, its ancestors, had feathers, right? That it's embedded within the tree. So if we found a fossil buffalo, and we asked ourselves the question, now, did this buffalo have hair or not? Of course, we would say yes. Right? Because by its position on the tree, all of its relatives have buffalo, even if the fossil bones themselves don't show evidence of hair. Right? So on this basis, Alan Brush and I and a few others as well predicted that the Tyrannosaurus Rex should have feathers. Now, I talked about this is a historical science. We don't often get chances to make predictions and test them in the same way that biology or that other scientists might do. You can go out and look at the demonstrations on different materials, and you'll be able to test hypotheses in a matter of minutes, right? Well, evolutionary biologists who look at ancient history don't have a chance to do that. But luckily, we made this prediction, and then thanks to the Liaoning fauna, earlier this year in March. They had the description of Delong paradoxus by Zhu Zheng and colleagues in Beijing. This was the earliest fossil Tyrannosaurus relative, again from the Liaoning of China, about 125 million years old. Here's images of its skull. Here's a reconstruction of its body. It was about 8 feet long and about 4 feet high. And when you look at its bones in detail, what you see is that it has filamentous materials growing off of its tail that are basically identical in morphology to many of the fossil theropod feathers that we've seen. And so from this we can conclude that yes, the relatives of T-Rex had feathers. Now, was T-Rex itself covered with feathers? Well, we don't know. There's a lot of reasons to think that feathers might have been less useful in an animal with a large body size. So, for example, if we think of an elephant, modern elephants have lost most of their hair, or reduced hair, right? Because they don't need that much hair to stay warm, right? And so T-Rex itself might have been kind of like a modern elephant. But if you look at an elephant's ears, there's hair in there, right? There's hair at the end of its tail. And so I would be convinced that, or I would still make the bold prediction if we ever find fossils, that Tyrannosaurus rex indeed had some kind of feathers on its body. Maybe the chicks in the nest were fuzzy, like bird chicks are. Okay. Well, that's a summary of the evidence of why we know that birds are theropod dinosaurs. What I want to do now is talk about how the theropod origin of bird changes our view of bird biology. We're going to have to focus on a few questions in bird biology here. So what do we do first? Well, for a lot of birds, it may be pretty simple to imagine them as dinosaurs. Here's a cassowary. A cassowary is a flightless bird from Australia and New Guinea. And as far as I'm concerned, except for the fact that it doesn't have teeth, this would be just about as vicious as any raptor you could imagine. And indeed, actually, although it's convergent, this guy has a big claw on his second toe, and it's about the only bird that's known to kill people. It actually can kick you in the stomach and give you a lethal blow with one of its toes, right? So he's sort of converged on some of the interestingly, this weird thing. It turns out these guys communicate in infrasound, very low frequency sound, right? Like elephants do. And the latest hypothesis for the function of this this weird crest on the head is that may be a sort of like a radiating device, like the melon on a whale for disseminating this sound. Now, other birds are kind of hard to imagine as dinosaurs, right? And this being among the smallest, the hovering or flying hummingbirds, which are found in the New World and mostly in South America. Well, it turns out that there's lots of features of bird biology that we can understand better by looking at dinosaurs. This is an amazing a find from Mongolia. This is a nest of oviraptor. This is a large bipedal theropod closely related to birds. And indeed, you can see this individual, this is the leg bones here, the two arm bones. There's part of the skull. There's the breast that's been eroded away. And what we have here is just the individual sitting on top of the eggs. So this is an example of a fossilized nesting behavior. So the individual is actually sitting on top of his or her eggs, protecting them, either keeping them warm, perhaps. We don't know if they actually brooded them the way a modern bird does, but at least protecting the eggs physically. And we now know that oviraptor is a bird, or is a dinosaur that had feathers. And so you see this gap between the arm and the body, and it's very likely that there were feathers all along here to help protect the eggs. So one of the most distinct attributes of birds is the fact that they sit on their eggs to incubate is something that, again, evolved in theropod dinosaurs before the origin of birds. But there's more. Birds have a unique way of laying eggs. Well, first of all, male birds have two testes, but female birds have only one ovary, the left ovary. And here's the ovary, and this is the long tube down which the egg is produced, and then the shell gland before the egg is laid. So it turns out that birds produce a clutch of eggs with that one ovary. Well, they differ from most reptiles. Imagine the sea turtle. You've all seen movies of sea turtles that come up on the beach. They lay all their eggs at once, right, in one big clunk. And it turns out that most dinosaurs did as well. Sauropods, certainly crocodiles do. That's the way that reptiles compose a clutch, by laying all their eggs all at one time. But birds, in contrast, lay their eggs one a day. So they complete the clutch through a series of days. This is what we call serial composition of the clutch, and it's unique to birds. No other reptiles do it. And for years, this has thought to be an adaptation for flight. If you only lay one egg a day, instead of keeping 10 or 15 eggs and laying them all at once, that means you can stay nice and light and fly. So it made sense that this had evolved as a result of an adaptation to flight. But one of the fascinating things, if we look back again at the eggs of theropod dinosaurs, is that they're laid in pairs. This is an example of a troodon nest, a picture care of Dave Verricchio at Montana State. And what you can see, if you examine these eggs in detail, you'll see that they're laid in pairs, right? And that implied that they weren't all laid at the same time. It wasn't the whole clutch of 25 or 24 or 30 eggs wasn't laid at once. It were composed over a series of times. What's the possibility that they could have been laid 2 at a time? Well, so this evidence implied that, well, perhaps theropod dinosaurs composed the clutch in a serial fashion, 2, then 2, then 2, instead of 1, 1, 1, that it would take a series of days to make a clutch. Well, let's examine it. So how many days would it take for an oviraptor to lay a clutch of 24 to 30 eggs? Well, at 2 eggs a day, that's going to be 12 to 15 days. Well, that's about the same time as you might imagine for some birds. And what's fascinating is that the maximum clutch size for many birds, especially birds that don't take care of their young, like ducks or chickens and their relatives, is about 12 to 15 days. So it may be that even the clutch size itself is determined by the same ecological determinant. Well, what would that be? Well, I've called that the shelf life hypothesis. And that is that the amount of time that it takes to lay a clutch, the maximum amount of time it takes to lay a clutch, is the time you have to go before the first egg starts to rot. Right? Because what happens is the female will lay all those eggs, and then she sits on them and begins the incubation. Well, it turns out that if we look at birds and at dinosaurs, theropod dinosaurs, they might have got the same shelf life for an egg, about 12 to 15 days. And interestingly, some support for the shelf life hypothesis comes from the fact that the largest clutches of eggs in all birds come from birds that live near the Arctic Circle. If you live in a refrigerator, the shelf life should be a lot longer, right? So this is a way in which our examination of theropod biology is suddenly informing ways in which ecological factors of modern birds might be determined. Well, excitingly, again, here's 2005. The discoveries keep coming and coming. We've been talking about this for a couple years, and then all of a sudden comes this. This is last spring. It was actually in the middle of ornithology course. And believe it or not, the Yale undergrads read Nature before the professors can get to it. And they say, oh, did you see that paper? And the paper is a pair of shelled eggs inside a female dinosaur. So this is a fossil of a troodontid dinosaur with 2 eggs that are about to be laid. So it's a fossil of exactly this proposed behavior occurring. So there's now support for the notion that this unique aspect of bird biology actually originated back in theropod dinosaurs. So that's a way in which the theropod origin of bird changes our view of bird biology. Things we thought were unique to birds are not unique to birds. Well, let's look at some other things and just finish up with how theropod origin of bird changes our view of dinosaur biology. Well, one thing we can say is that feathers are complicated in their color patterns. This is something we've been working on in my lab explicitly. Imagine all those different stripes and dots and spots. Well, it's possible that the dinosaurs were a lot more colorful than we imagine, right? There's nothing that indicates that they had to be drab or not colorful, and there's everything to indicate that ornamentation evolved very early on in the history of feathers, so that we could imagine brightly striped, patched, spotted theropods. So this is in one case where I think the imagination of toy makers is not yet up to the reality, right? Another thing that we want to do, now we're talking about bird biology, aspects of bird biology that inform dinosaur biology. In my own lab, we're working on structural color, but we're also working on the vision, the evolution of avian vision. So look at all these colorful different birds and how they use color. Well, why do they have such colors? Well, one of the things is that they are interested in, they have color vision. This is an example of the visible spectrum from blue all the way to red. But interestingly, these are the size of the electromagnetic waves that produce the light that we perceive as color. But birds, turns out, there should be another whole quadrant over here, because birds can see into the ultraviolet way beyond human vision, down to about 350, 325 nanometers. So they see colors, ultraviolet colors, that we cannot see. Well, how does that mean? How do birds actually see colors? Well, human vision is based on 3 different cone types, one that's sensitive to red, green, and blue. And we can imagine the colors as a trichromatic plot, a stimulation of relative stimulation of red, green, and blue cones in the retina. If we stimulate entirely the red cones, we're going to see a red color. If we stimulate just the green, we're going to see a green color. But if we mix them all together in equal quantities, we'll see white, which we plot here in the center of the triangle. A turquoise would be half green and half blue. A yellow would be a mixture of green and red, and more red would produce orange. So this is the way in which we can imagine the human color world, our trichromatic color world. But birds actually see ultraviolet. And their color space, the hue, the dimensions of hues, actually has an additional dimension. In addition to our color space, which imagine the bottom of this triangle, they see all sorts of other colors, including pure ultraviolet. They have other colors like ultra blue and ultra green and ultra red or ultra purple, which I call ultra yurple, yellow plus UV, all these weird colors. Well, do the birds actually have these colors? Do they see them? How do they use them? Well, it turns out that now that we look for these colors in nature, we find that all the birds have them. And I'm doing research with an undergrad right now on passerina buntings. Here's a colorful group of birds, and I just want to focus in on one of them, the painted bunting, which is a common bird of southeastern United States. And I'm working with Cassie Stoddart, who's a Yale sophomore. And what we've done is to measure the colors of various patches on the body. So here's an example of the reflectance spectra of the green back, the blue head, and the red belly. And what we can see is each of these patches have extensive ultraviolet in them. So if we look at the blue head right here, that large line is 400 nanometers. So at least half of the reflectance off the head is in the ultraviolet, which the birds can see, but we cannot. This red and green back are both combined with ultraviolet peaks. So those aren't just regular greens. Those are greens plus UV. It's a whole new color. Well, what do they look like? Well, Cassie's been doing some programming to show where these colors in the birds are found in the trichromatic space and in this tetrachromatic space. What you can see is, to us, that crown color is sort of a royal blue. But to the birds, it's an entirely different color, very far from the base of the triangle. It's way up here. It has extensive ultraviolet in it, right? And there's also this rump color, which is a bizarre red plus ultraviolet or green plus ultraviolet, is also a color. So this is an example of how the bird color vision or color space is different from ours. And we can imagine that the colors we see are merely a plane, but the colors in the plumage of a bird form a volume. So ultraviolet vision is not just beyond blue. It's actually an additional dimension to color that adds a richness to bird vision that we really can't imagine. One of the key features that we can, if you think about it, you can see that birds can tell who's wearing sunscreen as a gull, hovers over the beach. They can tell who's wearing sunscreen by the reflection of the skin, because they can see the lack or the presence of ultraviolet reflection, right? Well, I want to conclude today with extreme dinosaur biology, and this is to help you imagine or stimulate your imagination on what birds or what dinosaurs might really do. Well, in my lab, we're studying the evolution of all sorts of courtship displays. And display behavior is interesting because it only has to function in the brain of the other individual. So it's unconstrained, doesn't have to function in the real world, like a hand that might open a jar or a beak that might crack a nut. So what we see is incredible variation. So here, for example, some grebe behaviors, the wild displays of a frigate bird or of a sage grouse. But in my lab, we're working on some behaviors in South American birds, in particular birds that make sounds with their feathers. Here's another one. This is a bizarre bird. This is the auklet that makes a tangerine-smelling, it's actually the identical organic molecule to tangerine. And they use it as a pheromone. They communicate with it. And so they preen each other, and the members of the pair preen each other and cover each other with this tangerine pheromone during nesting. Anybody seen the March of the Penguins? Just imagine the March of the Penguins with like a tangerine odor. And this is kind of what you got here. But we're working on these mannequins, which are making snapping noises. Can we turn down the lights a little further? Whoa, did you see that? See that? This guy's making that snapping sound by knocking his wings together. That brrr is a wing sound. And he goes bam, 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 bam. This is a videotape taken at 500 frames a second in the wild in Costa Rica. So these are birds that are making totally unworldly, different kinds of sounds with feathers. Well, here's the most extreme. This is the clubwing manakin from Ecuador. Can we hear that? I'm sorry. Well, that's a really weird sound, right? It's actually a violin-sounding electronic music. You know, there's a lot of things you can use to try to figure out what. Well, it took us about 20 years to figure this out, but my student Kim Boswick finally convinced me, using high-speed video taken in Ecuador, that this bird is not only making the sound with the feathers, but it's doing it by stridulation. It's doing it like a cricket makes a sound. It turns out that the feathers oscillate at about 1,000 or 100 times a second, and that the individual feathers rub next to each other. One feather has a pick, and the other feather has a comb. So just like running your finger down the comb, it multiplies the frequency of the oscillation into the frequency of the sound. So the sound is about 1,400 hertz, and they're oscillating at about 1,000 or 100 cycles per second. So it's a mechanical sound made with feathers that's entirely converged on crickets. Now I want to conclude with two videos from work of my student Ed Scholes, who work in New Guinea on birds of paradise. Here's a bird of paradise, a courtship display. The male has this sort of tutu of black feathers, these 6 feathers coming out of its crown, and then these iridescent structurally colored feathers on the throat and the blue eyes. Look at that. To me, there's nothing about what we know about avian biology or dinosaur biology that doesn't include the possibility of such behaviors in other theropods, right? Here's another one. This is another bird of paradise with extraordinary blue structural color plumage on the throat and a few dots above the eyes. And he's going to make sorry. I'm going to see blue here in a second. The female's going to visit in a moment. There's the color above the eyes. Don't worry, you haven't seen anything yet. Here she comes. Right? Now that's extreme dinosaur biology. I think you'll all agree. Now he's frozen. He's just breathing here you can see him breathing, right? He's just frozen in that position, right? Now that's an example of the extreme use of feathers, right? You got optics, the structural color. You have these beautiful velvety feathers that are made not to reflect anything. You've got the special little muscles that erect those feathers into the air. So this does not make it makes that some of those scenes in Jurassic Park look tame, right? And the fact is, there's nothing about dinosaur biology or bird biology that wouldn't indicate that this is possible. So I hope that today I've stimulated you to think a couple of things. One, that birds are now wholly integrated into dinosaurs, and that bird watchers are extant dinosaur watchers. There's nothing about bird biology that isn't informed by the knowledge that birds are living dinosaurs today, right? This has both changed our definition of birds and indeed our appreciation of dinosaur biology in a new and revolutionary way. And it's my sincere hope that ornithology of the next century is basically pioneering this integration of bird biology with dinosaur biology. And then lastly, I hope that we'll all live long enough to see the special Jurassic Park integumentarily correct edition, where you put in that DVD and you pick a special sample that says appropriate skin, right? And that we see that whole thing again, but with the right feathers on the right organisms, because the biology of some of our favorite dinosaurs is totally revolutionized by the fact that they were covered with feathers. And that will truly integrates what we know about the most extreme dinosaurs on the planet with those that we thought we knew very well. Thank you very much. I'll be glad to answer any questions.